Welcome back to Latin American Today. My name is Renee. I'm glad that you're back. What does it mean to follow Jesus right now? What does it mean to be Latin American today? Those two questions that started this podcast. In every episode, we come back to the same questions. We turn them over. We look at them from a different angle. Today, I want to start with my father. I lost him when I was young. He left when I was still a child. And there are questions I will carry for the rest of my life that I will never be able to ask him directly. Who was his father? Where did his people come from? Really come from? Beyond the names that we have. What did it cost him to move through a country that had spent a century trying to erase men who looked like him? I don't know. I will never know. And for a long time, I thought that was just the grief of losing a parent too soon. But the older I get, the more I understand. Some of those unanswered questions aren't just about death and distance. They're about what was done to his people before he was born. The story was made hard to find on purpose. This episode is about colorism. But I want you to understand what colorism actually cost. Not in theory. In the questions you can't ask. In the stories that didn't survive. In the man you lost before you understood what he was carrying. I came to faith as a young man. And when Jesus got a hold of me, one of the things that changed was what I started paying attention to. I started seeing the margins, the people who were pushed out, the ones the system overlooked. And slowly, through that lens, I started seeing my own family differently. Colorism isn't something that happened between strangers. Most people think of it as a casting director's decision, an employer's bias, a police officer's split-second judgment. But that's not where it lives. That's where it shows up in the headlines. Where it actually lives is at the dinner table. In the phrases your tia says about a new baby. And in what actually gets celebrated at a wedding. In the stories your mother tells you about your father that don't land until you're old enough to hear what they're really saying. My father's nickname was El Indio. 100% indigenous. Fully indigenous features. Dark skin. He wore his ancestors on his face. The face of the Pipil, the people of Cojutepeque, at the foot of the Cerro de las Pavas. I am the lightest one in my family. Green eye, strong features, but the kind that are hard to place at first glance. My mother told me that when I was a baby, my father's friends would mock him. They said the baby couldn't be his. Some people told him I must be blind even, that it wasn't possible for a child to see through those light color eyes. I wonder how he wrestled with that. I wonder how heavy it was. I didn't hear that story until I was older. Until after I had given my life to Jesus. Until after I had already started advocating for people in the margins. After Canada and First Nations peoples had handed me a mirror and I started learning to see. And when it landed hard. Not as information, but as grief. My father carried something because of the way I looked. A wound his own friends opened. And I never got to ask him about it. I never got to sit with him and say, I see it now. I understand. That is what colorism costs at its most personal. Not just opportunity or dignity, though it costs those too. It costs the conversations you're never going to have. the understanding that arrived too late. And the worst part is this: nobody in that story was trying to be evil. His friends thought they were joking. The system that taught them to use light skin as evidence of legitimacy, they didn't invent that. It was handed to them, the way it was handed to all of us. That is what this episode is about. Not the people, the system, and how deep inside of us it got. My father's nickname was El Indio. I've talked about him in earlier episodes. He was 100% indigenous, fully indigenous features. With his dark skin, he wore his ancestry on his face without apology. He was the son of Cojutepeque, at the foot of El Cerro de las Pavas, of the Pipil people of El Salvador. He's passed now, but from time to time I hear stories from my mother. And there's that one story that she told me that I haven't been able to shake. From when I was a baby, when I first arrived. And I had these green eyes, and his friends would mock him. They would say, that baby can't be his. Look at those eyes, that's not your son. Some people would go as far as to tell him that I must be blind. That it wasn't possible to see with light color eyes. That God doesn't put that kind of light in a child. I wonder how he wrestled with it. I wonder how heavy it was. I want you to sit that for a moment. Just sit with that. My father was mocked by his own people because his son had green eyes. The implication, the thing underneath that joke, was that light eyes meant European blood, and European blood meant it couldn't be his. His own community used colorism as a weapon against him. And the prize, the thing that supposedly proved I wasn't his, was proximity to whiteness, my green eyes. The feature that has opened doors for me my entire life, the thing some people call beautiful, that was a weapon used against my father. I will always wonder how he wrestled with it. I will always wonder how heavy that was. I've carried that story for a long time. I'm still learning what it cost. Have you ever heard when darker skinned man marries a light skinned woman? The family celebrates. Has mejorado la raza. You have improved the race. I want to be careful here, because I know many families like this, and I know it's said with joy, in genuine celebration, not malice, not cruelty. They're not standing in a government office drawing out policy. They're celebrating. But they are also completing a 200-year-old government program without knowing it. Blanqueamiento. Whitening. This was not a metaphor. This was state policy across Latin America throughout the 19th and 20th century. Argentina. The phrase was, gobernar es poblar. To govern is to populate. Juan Bautista Alberdi wrote it in 1852. What he meant was, populate with Europeans, specifically, to dilute indigenous and African ancestry. Brazil. After abolishing slavery in 1888, the Brazilian government subsidized European immigration, explicitly to whiten the population. Debated in parliament, written into policy, fully funded. Mexico. The technocrats who run Mexico under Porfirio Diaz promoted European immigration to modernize the nation. Modernize meant whiten. And then there is El Salvador, my country. And here this story is not just policy. Here, it is a massacre. January 22, 1932. General Maximiliano Hernandez Martinez, president of El Salvador, ordered the suppression of an indigenous peasant uprising. The Pipil people led by Feliciano Ama, had joined a broader revolt against a government that had stolen their lands, suppressed their rights, and left them to starve. Hernandez Martinez called them communists. He sent in the military. Between 10,000 and 40,000 people were killed, most of them indigenous people. Historians and scholars call it ethnocide, not just a massacre, an ethnocide, the deliberate destruction of a people's identity. Here's what happened after. The survivors burned their own clothing, their traditional garments, the textiles that carry the visual language of their communities, their identity, their ancestry. They burned them with their own hands, in their own courtyards, because wearing them was a death sentence. They stopped speaking Nahuatl in public, the language I talked about in episode 2, the one that gave us tomate, chocolate, aguacate. They spoke it only at home, in hushed tones, at a whisper, so no one outside could hear. They abandoned indigenous names, indigenous dress, indigenous music. They buried every outward sign of who they were, not because they wanted to, because Hernandez Martinez had made indigenous identity a death sentence. And then, to complete the project, his government formally banned the Nahuatl language, traditional indigenous clothing, and indigenous music. What the massacre didn't erase, the law finished. And then 1 year later, Hernandez Martinez made the exclusion permanent, not just inside the country, but at its borders. June 21st, 1933, Decreto Legislativo número 86, El Salvador's immigration law. It was published in the Diario Oficial. Article 36 explicitly prohibited entry to people of black race, Malays, Chinese, and Mongolians, indigenous people, Arabs, Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, Turks, Romani people. Blanqueamiento written into the nation's front door, nor ideology, law. Scholars who study this period call La Matanza and Decreto 86 call it a single project, colonial terror followed by race loss. The massacre destroyed indigenous identity from the inside. The decree locked the wrong kind of people out from the inside. Together, they defined what kind of Salvadorian the state was building. That was the El Salvador my grandparents lived in. That was the El Salvador that shaped how my family talked about skin. By the early 2000s, researchers found fewer than 100 Nahuatl speakers remaining in all of El Salvador. A language spoken by millions, reduced to a whisper, reduced to almost nothing in a single generation. My family is from Cojutepeque, from the foot of El Cerro de las Pavas, Pipil land. My father, El Indio, carried 100% indigenous ancestry in his face, in his body, in his blood. And I carry 47% Native American DNA. The land is in me. The people are in me. But the language is almost gone. The clothing is gone. The public ceremony is gone. Not because my people chose to leave it behind, because a general with an army made survival contingents on abandoning it. That is blanqueamiento in El Salvador, not a policy paper. A massacre followed by a law, followed by a generation of children who learned, if you look too indigenous, if you speak too indigenous, you will be next. My family wasn't unusual. My family was doing what survival demanded, to move toward the light, to celebrate the step away from indigeneity, to say with joy at a party, que has mejorado la raza. You've improved the race as if it were broken, as if it needed fixing, as if the indigenous blood were a problem to solve. No, the system was broken, and my family was just trying to survive it. That is blanqueamiento, not in a history book, but at a family celebration, said with love, built on a grave. And that's what makes it so durable. Love is the best delivery system the system ever found. What about the phrases that live in your memory from when you were younger? Phrases usually used as an insult. Light-skinned Latin American, aim this at dark-skinned people. People who seem too indigenous, too unrefined, too much like what we supposedly left behind. You must have heard them. They're thrown around casually, like it costs nothing to say. And here's why I need to hear about those phrases. Those phrases are only said because people think you're on the right side of the line. The insults may not be aimed at you. People saying them don't bother to lower their voices. And that's the privilege that I'm describing today. Not that people are kind to you because of the way you look, but that they're unguarded and that they show you who they are, and they assume you agree. I used to stay silent. I would hear it. I understood what he was doing, and I would say nothing. I remember thinking, and I'm ashamed of this now, I thought things like, well, at least these people know where they're from. At least they have a place they call their own. Ceremonies they call their own. Traditions they call their own. Things they can point to. I've always wondered about mine. But I never said that out loud. I stayed in the silence of the privilege. Now, all those things that are said are one thing. It is erasure coded as humor. Blanqueamiento with a punchline. And we've all heard it and said nothing. At least not then. I grew up watching telenovelas. I mean, every Latin American family I knew watched them. They were the background noise of childhood. The dramatic music, the dramatic declarations, the whole world filtered through the particular light of a Mexican or Venezuelan TV studio. And the telenovelas taught us something. They taught us who was beautiful, who was worthy of a story, who got to be the protagonist. The protagonist was light eyes, light skin, European features. She was the one who was wrong, who suffered, who ultimately triumphed. Her suffering was the center of the universe. The maid was dark. The servant was indigenous presenting. The villain, when the villain was a woman, was often darker, one who wanted too much, who didn't know her place, who reached for a life that wasn't meant for her. I always saw myself as the protagonist. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment, because I watch these shows and I identify with the light-skinned character. I was drawn to the story of the one who was beautiful, who was centered, who mattered. That was not accidental. That was the system working exactly as designed. I was the right kind of Latin American for the telenovela. I had the eyes, skin tone, and the features that fit the protagonist slot. And I watched years of this without once asking who built the system, who decided the maid is dark and the princess is light, who decided that looks like beauty and that looks like background. It wasn't until I really learned, from First Nations people here in Canada, from reading Arlene Davila, from sitting with my own family's story, that I could see the telenovela for what it was. And then I couldn't unsee it. That's what privilege does. It tells you you're watching the show when you're actually in it. I want to talk about the church because most of you listening can be people of faith. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Look at the leadership of your congregation. Really look. Who's in front? Who preaches? Who leads worship? Who sits on the board? Who holds authority? In the Latin American congregations I've been part of and I've seen, and I've been in several, the leadership is overwhelmingly light-skinned. I don't think it's usually intentional. I don't think pastors are sitting around making decisions based on skin tone. But the pattern is there, and patterns don't need intention to do harm. Now look at the theology being taught, the books on the shelf, the voices being quoted, white theologians, European theologians, American evangelical theologians, not Gustavo Gutierrez, not Oscar Romero, not the Latin American voices who have been doing theology from the margins for decades. The canon of the Latin American church is mostly white. That's not theology. It's cultural submission dressed as doctrine. And then there are the Afro-Latino members. I've watched this happen in more than one congregation. An Afro-Latino person comes in, black, visibly black. They sit, they participate, they stay for a while. And then if you're paying attention, if you talk to them, you notice something. They start to use different language about themselves. Not black. Caramelo, moreno, trigueño. Not black. Nobody said you're not welcome here if you're black. No one said that. But the message arrived anyway. Through the absence of black leadership, through the absence of black theology, through 1,000 small signals that said, the kind of Latin American we celebrate here is a particular kind. And they learned to adjust their language to fit the room. That is blanqueamiento inside the sanctuary, on Sunday, not in 1850, now. If the church does not actively resist the racial hierarchy on the street, it reproduces it, passively, automatically, without ever meaning to. I talked in episode 4 about the God of the poor, the God of the margins, the God who does not rank bodies. If that God is real, then the church that centers the light-skinned face and quotes only white theologians has some reckoning to do. I came to Canada and I learned to see. That sounds dramatic. I mean it simply. In El Salvador and Latin America, I had no framework for what I was observing. It was just the air, the water, the way things are. Here in Canada, I started to learn from First Nations people, from their scholars, from elders, from communities. And what they were describing, the erasure of language and forced adoption of European identity, the way colonial education turns you against your own ancestors. I knew that story. I had lived a version of it. And it was as if someone handed me a mirror. I had been blind to what was happening in my own community. Not because the evidence wasn't there, because I was too inside it to see it. The privilege of the light-skinned Latin America is exactly that. You can be surrounded by the system and mistake it for the atmosphere. I had to come to someone else's colonized land to understand what colonization did to mine. That's a specific kind of irony I've had to sit with for a long time. And I developed a voice, slowly, over years, not overnight. I started naming what I saw at church and family conversations, in community spaces, colorism, blanqueamiento, the hierarchy inside Latinidad. The first response is almost always denial. We don't do that here. We're all the same. We're family. You are being divisive. I understand that response. I was that response for years. Silence is easier. And when you're on the advantage side of the hierarchy, silence is comfortable. But I've stopped choosing the comfort of silence over the truth of what I see. I don't know what he did to my father. I don't know how he wrestled with it. But I don't want to play it cool anymore. What does it mean to follow Jesus right now? What does it mean to be Latin American today? Part of the answer is this. It means looking at your skin in the mirror, whatever shade it is, and asking what the system has told you it means. What doors it opens, what doors it closes, what you've been handed out without earning, and what has been taken from people who look different than you. For the dark-skinned listener, for the one who was told, no te pongas al sol, who was the maid in the telenovela, who learned to say caramelo instead of black, who heard the many phrases aimed at them because they're dark skinned. I want you to know, the hierarchy lied. You were never less. You were never background. You are the story, not the maid in it. And for everyone, the family that celebrates the light-skinned grandchildren that are doing what 200 years of policy taught them to do, the telenovela that taught you who was beautiful was assigned to teach you exactly that. The church that centers light-skinned leadership is repeating a pattern it didn't invent, but has a responsibility to break. We didn't build this system, but we're inside it, and we're responsible for what we do inside it. My father's friend mocked him because of my green eyes. I will always wonder how he wrestled with it. I will always wonder how heavy that was. But I don't want that heaviness to have been for nothing. I want to be someone who looked at the compliment and asked what it cost, who named the system instead of benefiting from it quietly. That's not everything, but it's a start. La piel más clara no está más cerca de Dios. El sistema dice que sí. La familia lo repite. La telenovela lo enseña. La iglesia a veces lo confirma en silencio. Pero el Evangelio dice otra cosa. Dice que en Cristo no hay judío ni griego, no hay esclavo ni libre. Tal vez yo añadiría, no hay moreno ni güero, no hay caramelo ni indio. No hay lightest one in the room. Hay personas hechas a imagen de Dios, todas ellas, sin jerarquía de tono. Vayan y sean eso para sus familias, para sus congregaciones, para sus comunidades. Hasta la próxima.